They also said that video advertising is still the largest revenue driver for the company. I thought that was interesting because clearly, Snapchat spent the bulk of its time talking about AR on the call and in other settings. But when you actually look at the numbers, video advertising is still the biggest revenue driver for the company.
Hey gang, it's Wednesday, May 5th. Debbie, Nazmul, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, the marketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and I'm joined today by two folks. We have our principal analyst who covers everything social media. Her name is Deborah Aho-Williamson.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey, Debbie. We're also joined by Nazmul Islam, who is one of our forecasting analysts.
Hello, Marcus.
Hey, chat. Today's fact, according to Guinness World Records, set, the word set, S-E-T, has the largest number of meanings of any word in the English language, with 430 different senses listed in the 1989 edition of the second edition of the Oxford English Dictionary. So you could set something down, movie set, the sun had set, something set me thinking, set your watch, the mold has set you some work, etc., etc. There's a lot, and thought about it. And E, the letter E, is the most common letter and appears in the English language and appears in 11% of all English words. So what that means is if you pick out an E in Scrabble, you're in great shape. If you pick out a Q and you smack the board across the table and you walk out in disgust. Today's real topic though, not Scrabble. Snapchat. Are we talking about Snapchat today? Is that what we're talking about? Or is it Facebook?
We're talking about Snapchat.
We're talking about Snapchat, yes.
Okay. I thought Snapchat and then I thought, hang on a second. It may be Facebook, and I've prepped for the completely wrong thing. It would be a very short episode if that was the case. Today's real topic, how Snapchat got on in Q1. So, as always, we're going through the earnings of certain companies. Snapchat today, which I thought was Facebook, it's not. We're going to go through the users and then the revenue, and then we've got another news in the second half of the show. But let's start talking about users. We'll go through some of the highlights. 280 million total users worldwide, up a robust 15 million from Q1. Similar year-on-year growth Snapchat saw last Q1. By region, North America reached 93 million, maintaining the trend of the last few years of adding 1 to 2 million new users each quarter, or all but one, pretty much. Europe mirrored last Q1, adding 3 million, reaching 77 million total, behind North America's 93. And then the rest of world is actually the most people using Snapchat. Rest of world reached 111 million, up 55% year on year. Debbie, I'll start with you. What jumps out to you about Snapchat's user numbers in Q1?
Yeah, I was very pleased to see the growth because for some time now, we have been talking about how the pandemic has caused more people to use social media, spend more time on social media. But there's also been this overhang of, well, when is that growth going to start to slow down? And, I guess, unfortunately, the pandemic has lingered on. And as a result, though, for the social platforms, Snap in particular, the growth has continued. And so that's positive. I do think that there is a point of diminishing returns, which will probably happen again later this year. But for now, I think the performance, especially outside of the North America and Europe regions, was quite strong.
Mm-hmm. Nazmul, what jumped out to you, mate?
I think same thing as Debbie. It's just that they're doing so well comparatively for a platform that's not really that brand new. They've been around for a little bit of a while now. And now they're picking up momentum this late into the game, whereas you think they would lose all of it to newer platforms like TikTok. The fact that they're still able to maintain such a high growth level speaks volumes to the platforms trying out new things and trying to maintain users with their policies about keeping in touch with friends and making sure they protect privacy and things like that. So all just good signs to me.
Speaking about trying new things, Snapchat's TikTok-esque feature Spotlight reached 125 million users in March, up from 100 million just 2 months prior. Snap has been paying $1 million a day to creators posting top videos. They said engagement on Spotlight was up as well. What do you guys make of how Spotlight's done?
Yeah, I was really pleased to see the growth there because obviously TikTok is a huge threat in this short video realm. And, we obviously also have Instagram with Reels. So, Snapchat's growth is good. And they spent a lot of time talking about it on their earnings call. It's definitely remains to be seen whether people will continue to flock to Spotlight. But for now, the trends look good.
Mm-hmm. And do you see a ton of overlap, Debbie, with all these TikTok-esque features, or do you see folks generally gravitating to one or the other? We were talking about social audio and how, will Clubhouse be the main place where everyone uses social audio and then people use it a little bit on other platforms, or will social audio, the concept, just be used in a lot of different platforms across the board? Do you see one platform, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, whoever, winning the kind of the mini video race?
Well, I think there's a lot more competition directly between TikTok and Instagram. The concepts are quite similar, so much so that people still post their TikToks onto Instagram, although Instagram's trying to get people to stop doing that. You still see them kind of cross-posted. It's a bit different the way that Snapchat is handling it. I mean, like you mentioned, they are paying out to top performing snaps. The things that appear in Spotlight are more vetted. It's a more kind of curated experience. So I kind of see what Spotlight is doing, or what Snap is doing with Spotlight, is something that's a bit different and purposely different. The competition to me is definitely much more between TikTok and Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Three things that jumped out to me from the user side of things. One was CEO Evan Spiegel noting that Snapchat's Android user base now larger than their iOS user base. Scott Nova of Adweek was saying this is an important note as the company and many others in the industry brace for Apple's privacy changes in iOS. Second thing I noted, by region, North America's share of total users continues to slide, now at 33% share, North American users of the total, 33% down from 39 a year ago. That's relying more on those international folks. And speaking of international folks, a third point here, rest of world has 3 consecutive quarters now of double-digit user gains in terms of total millions, 10 million, 12 million, and then 12 million for this last quarter, Q1. And that's better than the single-digit gains it saw last year. Let's finish talking about users by talking about Q2 and guidance for Q2. So Snap is expecting Q2 user growth to be slightly better than last year, adding 10 million in the quarter to reach 290. Either if you want to talk to me about the quarterly numbers or reforecast yearly numbers, so maybe that one's more relevant, more of a zoomed out perspective. What do you make of what Snapchat can achieve user-wise going forward this year?
Well, I'll talk to you first about what our assumptions are on our e-marketer side. It's still very good for them even on the yearly level. We're assuming in overall worldwide that Snapchat is going to have over 400 million monthly active users by the end of 2021, which is going to represent a growth of around 14%. And specifically on the US side of things, they would have 87 million of those users being in the US, and that's a growth of around 2.6%. And so how it falls in line with their expectations, I think it goes along well that we're expecting them to continue to grow each quarter for the next 3 in this year. Q2 might be a little bit tougher just because last year we had the pandemic, and that caused a lot of people to be more active on digital activities like social media because they were spending more time at home because of either lockdown procedures or just working from home and things like that. There could be less time spent on these social media platforms now with people returning back to work, resuming going outside and stuff with all the increases in vaccinations. But despite all that, because of things like Spotlight and how they're working in more users with privacy protection policies and all the new features they have with AR, we think they're still going to have a good level of growth throughout the year.
I don't have a whole lot to add on top of what Nazmul said, which is excellent recap of our forecasts. But, in comparison to other social platforms, I think this is where it gets interesting because we just saw Twitter come out with guidance that its Q2 was not going to be all that robust. And so a platform like Twitter is actually having more challenges with growth in users and retaining the users that it gained in 2020. So Snapchat, in converse, is doing very well. And I wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm. Nazmul, you mentioned time spent, and it may come down as people, spend less time on the internet this year as lockdown restrictions ease up and the pandemic kind of fades a little bit. Yeah, time spent by Snapchat users on Snapchat. It got a tiny bump last year of about 2 minutes from 26 to 28 minutes. Is going to maintain that 28 minutes going forward pretty much. In comparison, Instagram went up about 3 minutes. So it's in keeping with where the other social platforms have been, although Instagram we're expecting to tick down a tiny bit and be about the 28-minute mark per day per user as well. As you mentioned, over 400 million Snapchat users worldwide, about close to 90 million in the US. So that's the user numbers. Let's move to revenue. The highlights, $770 million made in Q1, top line, 770. That's up 66% year on year, better than the 45% growth it witnessed last Q1, 66% this quarter. By region, North America, which accounts for close to 3/4 of all the money Snapchat makes, pulled in 553 million, up 75%. So over-indexed on the 66% total for the worldwide growth. So that 75% for North America was nearly double the 40% gains it made last Q1. Europe's 50% growth and rest of world's 47% were similar to last year's increases for those respective regions. Debbie, I'll start with you again. What jumps out to you for Snapchat's revenue picture in Q1?
Yeah, I mean, I think the highlight here is that we're comparing to Q1 of 2020, which is when the pandemic really took hold. And if you remember, if you can, I mean, I don't know if it's emblazoned in people's memories or if they've tried to forget it, but those last 3 weeks of March were terrifying for advertising and for digital platforms and for advertising platforms in general, because many marketers pulled budget. There was pretty much a halt in a lot of advertising spending as people started to, make sense or try to make sense of the reality of the pandemic. So these comparisons that we're seeing, this revenue growth that happened in Q1 is very strong, but it's in comparison to what was kind of a shaky ending quarter of Q1 in 2020. So I think, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I think the Q2 comparisons are going to be even more interesting because that was the first full quarter when the pandemic was, in full effect around the world.
Nazmul, how about you? What do you make of how much money Snapchat pulled in the first 3 months of this year?
Exactly as Debbie said, it's a weird comparison because of the way pandemic just started in the first quarter. But in terms of what it relates to looking forward is that we're going to expect a little bit of higher growth for the full year this year than what they had last year, because assuming, nothing else goes wrong, jinx, knock on wood, then we should have a lot more of the gain momentum that they had at the end of last year with, all the brand advertisers coming back, all the new ad products that they released, and just a bunch of new tools that they're trying with e-commerce activities we'll talk about later. But all of these things should have a kind of a forward momentum going for Snapchat, and you should see kind of sustained high level of growth for Q2, Q3, and Q4. And overall, we're kind of expecting the year growth to be even slightly better than last year's without any pandemic effects.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that Q2 revenue guidance. Snap is expecting incredibly strong total revenue growth in Q2 of close to 80%, 80, at $830 million for the quarter, up from $450 last Q2. Guys, do we expect the same?
I think honestly it might be a little bit higher than that. Even I think they're underestimating the numbers on purpose, just so they can always beat expectations or performance numbers.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I agree. And again, we're comparing to Q2, like I just mentioned. Q2 2020 was when many publishers saw much lower growth rates than normally would have in a Q2 time period. And so the comps, as they call them in the financial industry, are going to be very positive for Q2, which is great. But I did want to talk about too that something that stuck out to me that I forgot to mention in my analysis of Q1 is the types of advertising that were popular on Snapchat. Obviously, Snapchat talks a lot about augmented reality, and it's one of its key calling cards. It spent a lot of time on the call talking about examples of augmented reality. But in reality, they also said that video advertising is still the largest revenue driver for the company. And I thought that was interesting because clearly, Snapchat spent the bulk of its time talking about AR on the call and in other settings. But when you actually look at the numbers, according to them, video advertising is still the biggest revenue driver for the company.
Shiny new thing versus the cash cow. Yeah, we're estimating Snapchat's full year US ad revenues will grow by 46% this year to $1.8 billion, accounting for just over 3%, 3.1% of total social network ad spending. That is up impressively, actually, from 2.7% last year. A few other highlights I thought were interesting. North America average revenue per user up 66%. For rest of world, their average revenue per user was down again, down 7%. Strong user growth, though, so as to be expected. And they Snapchat lost as much money as they did last Q1, a net loss of $300 million. That wraps up the first half of the show. Now time for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story in about 30 seconds or so before in other news in the second half of the show. We'll start with Debbie, then go straight to Nazmul. Debbie, what were your key takeaways from the first half, basically how Snapchat did in Q1?
Yeah, so my key takeaways are Snapchat's performance was very strong in revenue. It was almost as strong in growth in users. And the guidance for Q2 was also equally strong. So I think they beat the analysts' expectations for most marks in Q1. And Q2, at least according to their guidance, is also looking like it will be a positive quarter for Snap.
So Snapchat set high expectations for themselves when they had an investor/analyst day where they expected 50% growth for the next several years for themselves. And I think so far Q1's been a positive sign for them with the good revenue and user growth. And now we just have to look forward to seeing if they could continue the momentum. And like Debbie said, like they're still doing the right things, even with investments in new stuff like AR and some of their other side projects. They're still doing a lot in video with Snap Originals and premium video ads. So they're positioning themselves pretty well.
And that wraps up the lead story. It's time now for another news, but first a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, that's VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. All right, folks, we are back. It's time now for another news. Today, Snapchat is getting ready to integrate a fashion recommendation app. We look at how social media behaviors have evolved because of the pandemic, and Facebook is rolling out some new ad offerings. Story 1. Snapchat is getting ready to integrate fashion recommendation app Screenshop into its platform. The social networking company bought Screenshop's parent company, Craze, last fall, notes the information. Users will be able to submit photos via the Memories section of Snapchat's app. Screenshop will then make shopping recommendations based on the photos and then send the user to third-party sites to buy items. Debbie, we'll start with you. What do you think of this deal and Snapchat's broader shopping efforts?
Yeah, so Snapchat is making some very interesting moves in e-commerce. I mean, obviously, just to set the stage, all social platforms are making moves in e-commerce right now. And so it would be strange if Snapchat weren't. But what it's doing is really going with its strong points. So Snapchat has obviously been talking about augmented reality for a very long time. So some of its acquisitions and partnerships have to do with virtual try-on and fit. It's also looking very closely at building out e-commerce capabilities, specifically for apparel and accessories. So this particular acquisition and integration struck me as being very much in that mold. The one takeaway that I found interesting in reading about it was the idea that they would make recommendations based on photos that you had saved in your memories. I had a bit of a pause of sort of privacy in that, but not much, just a little bit of a pause. Just trying to figure out, well, do people want to have recommendations for things based on photos they've saved? And I'm not sure about that. I think it'll be interesting to watch. Yeah,
there are close to 50, about 49 million US social networking augmented reality users this year. That's what we forecast. But we only expect 3 million more people to join them next year and 3 million more people to join them the year after. So the shared population who are using augmented reality through social network in the US, not going up really at all. Story 2. An article in Ignite Social Media by Jennifer Wagner looked into how social media behaviors have evolved because of the pandemic. Ignite's survey found 5 things. Well, I found a lot, but here's 5 highlights. Number 1, people are now more comfortable with brands running ads on social media. Number 2, folks are now less likely to join new groups on social media. Number 3, some folks have been more willing to try new social networks with Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok leading the way. Number 4, folks are creating less content on social media than they were pre-pandemic. Number 5, people are most likely to unfollow a brand or influencer if they think that they are taking a political stance on an issue that person disagrees with. So, Debbie, which of these trends do you think is most likely to stick around and why? To recap, brands running ads, people more comfortable, new groups, people less likely to join. Number 3, people are trying new social networks. Number 4, creating less content. Number 5, likely to unfollow someone because of a political position.
Wow, it's hard to pick just one of those because I think that there's still plausibility for all of it. But I think if I had to pick just one, I think maybe the political stance response, partially just because we're not in a political year or in a year this year, 2021, where there's going to be a lot of election activity going on. I think there's generally a lot of question about when and how brands should get involved in political causes. We're definitely seeing more of that, and environmental causes and things like that as well. It's really hard for me to say because I'm also actually thinking about the group finding where people were less likely to join groups, because I kind of disagree with that, at least based on my own experience and just seeing what's happening around me. I feel like a lot of people have joined more groups.
Yeah.
And I know personally that I have myself.
I was surprised by that as well. And I was trying to think, was it because I just saw a lot of advertising for different platforms trying to push groups? Or whether there is more research to back that one up. Nazmul, how about you? Which of these trends do you think could stick around?
Well, Debbie took the interesting topic with the political stuff. We all love politics. But I think that was an interesting tidbit there when he said that people wanted to try new social media and he included like YouTube in there. I thought that was just pretty weird because I thought YouTube is already so highly penetrated and so many people already use it. But I guess this just shows that all social media networks can still do to like gain more users, and there's still a lot of people that haven't tried it out yet. And I look at like the positive aspect of everything that you said. So like people are more willing to try new stuff and trying to use social media to connect with people that they, kind of lost contact with before the pandemic. And that could be like a positive side effect of everything that's happened. People are trying to be more engaged and more talkative with everyone around them and like people that are close to them. Beforehand, everyone pretty much probably just thought like, we don't need to stay in contact with all these like social media groups and friends and stuff like that because we always have time. But now people are more like in line of thought was that like they should stay connected with everyone around them. And going back to Snapchat, even they had like an effort to have people recheck their friends group and stuff like that every so often to see if they still want to be friends with this person, if they want to still send messages. It was like a way to make sure that people are still connected with the people they want to be. So that could be one positive aspect coming out of all this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting note on YouTube. Yeah, are most people using it already? So I just went and had a quick look. So we say this year, 75% of people in America who are internet users will also use YouTube. So pretty much everybody, 3 out of 4. However, when you look by age, everyone under the age of 45, most about 8 in 10, 9 in 10 are using YouTube. But when you get to the older age categories, you've got 55 to 64, about 2/3 of them. And anyone over the age of 65, about half of them. We're not forecasting those to go up too much. The 55 to 64 is ticking up a little bit, but I assume that's what they're talking about, those folks who are kind of late Gen X, early boomer, perhaps. But just one survey. Interesting to see more research on all of these points. Story 3, Facebook is rolling out some new ad offerings across videos, stories, and is testing out ads and reels, says TechCrunch and Reuters. So number 1, first thing they're doing, Facebook will begin testing reels ads in India, Brazil, Germany, and Australia. Ads can be up to 30 seconds long and will be vertical and full screen like they are in stories. However, these ones in reels will let folks comment on, like, view, save, share, and skip them. The second thing here, insider intelligence analyst Mariel Soto-Reyes notes in our eMarketer Briefing newsletter that the company, Facebook, is also rolling out content-specific placement for video ads with in-stream video topics. Moving beyond audience targeting, Facebook is testing the feature globally. And finally, Facebook is also testing sticker ads for Facebook stories, where brands can create a sticker that, if tapped, links to a product or page. You can buy things. Creators get a revenue split with Facebook for the ad. So Debbie, start with you. Facebook testing ads and reels, in-stream video topics, and also sticker ads. What do you think is the most interesting part of these various ad offerings from Facebook?
I'm going to have to go with the Reels part of that story. We've obviously seen, TikTok take off. We talked earlier in the episode about the competition between TikTok and Instagram when it comes to short video. And, clearly this was something that Instagram was always thinking about. I think there is a nice synergy with the ads looking similar to Stories ads. I think that's going to make it easier for advertisers to port what they're doing in Stories, which is very popular for advertisers, over to Reels. But of those 3 things, for sure, the Reels advertising, I think, was the biggest part of the story and probably the biggest revenue potential as well of the 3.
Nazmul?
Same, I think Reels is like the biggest story here, definitely. The other 2 are, while interesting niche little new ad products, they're not going to make much significance as of yet. They'll be part of like especially like the sticker ads. They could be pretty interesting for helping on the social commerce side of things. But we're forecasting that Instagram's ad sales revenue in the US is going to tick up around 50% by the end of the year. Facebook's overall US ad revenues. So any new ad products that could really help them is a big boost. It could be a big driver in revenue. And while they're not testing it in the US, if it has like a lot of commercial success outside in those other countries, could definitely expect to see those being integrated into the US platform soon.
On the sticker ads, Ashley Carmen of The Verge had pointed out that the sticker does note that it's sponsored. Just below it, it says sponsored, but the font is thin and discreet. And it was actually white in this case on a white background, or a light background was hard to make out. So she says she thinks people are likely to miss the small disclaimer and possibly not know that the people posting them receive a kickback from any sales made. That's all we've got time for today's episode. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Marcus.
And thank you, Nazmul.
Glad to be here.
Despite your comment about the Lakers at the beginning. And thanks to everyone listening. You can now listen to the Behind the Numbers podcast on YouTube if you so choose. That's right. We went and popped the podcast on YouTube in case anyone would like to listen to us there. You can, of course, listen to us in all the usual places where you're currently listening, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pandora, etc., etc. And we'll see you guys tomorrow, hopefully, for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an e-marketing podcast made possible by VTEX.